Hello and welcome to History Bite. Today we're talking about the Field of the Cloth of Gold, an event which took place over an almost 4-week period between Henry VIII of England and Francis I of France. It had been 2 long years since the major European powers had agreed to sign the Treaty of London. This non-aggression pact confirmed that the signatories agreed not to attack one another and would also aid any nation which came under attack. Now, a new meeting had been proposed to solidify the newfound friendship between England and France into a stronger bond. The meeting itself took place in Bellingham, a commune in France, around 10 miles southeast of Calais. This area at the time was called the Pale of Calais and was an English-controlled region which had been won during the 100 Years' War under the reign of Edward III. At the time, Henry VIII was going into his 11th year as king, while the French King Francis I was in his 5th. English Cardinal Thomas Wolsey took on the role as planner and organiser, and using his charisma as a statesman and his connections to the Pope, he arranged for an event which would promise the attendants pageantry and splendour on a colossal scale. And you only have to look at the personalities of both Henry and Francis to understand exactly why this was going to be such an extravagant event. Both men considered themselves to be Renaissance princes, which meant they brought Renaissance principles into their reigns, which included a love of the arts, of dance, of music, poetry, and generally a feeling of elegance at court. Both men were also of a similar age and had reputations for being dashing and charming, and so they were naturally curious of each other. This would have led to competition between the two kings and meant that they would spare no expense in order to show off their wealth in a display of opulence and grandeur. The summit itself got its name from the 300 tents brought by the French, with golden thread woven into the fabric of the material, causing a golden shimmer whenever they caught the sun's rays. Both kings brought huge retinues of councillors and followers, and set up camps on hills of equal height, making frequent visits to each other's accommodation. This was Henry's chance to make a big impression on the European continent. There were a series of events and games staged, as well as jousting tournaments, in which both kings took part. There were archery displays and a mixing of musical talents from both countries. Henry even challenged Francis to a wrestling match, which he ended up losing. Every night saw elaborate banquets mixed with entertainment and much revelry. It's estimated that some 2,200 sheep were consumed during this period. That's a lot of people eating sheep. It goes to show the size and the scale of these festivities. In order to show his piety, Francis had built a chapel serviced by 35 priests, but Henry had outdone him, having 2 fountains flowing with red wine, day and night. But it was the 2 companions that Henry had brought along that seemed to draw Francis's attention the most. Henry had brought 2 monkeys with him covered in gold leaf, which had been a present from the Ottoman Sultan. These monkeys got up to no end of mischief at the banquets, stealing people's food and robbing things out of their pockets, but Francis had enjoyed playing with the monkeys so much, he asked Henry and insisted that the monkeys attend every banquet as long as he was there. One of the paintings from the Field of the Cloth of Gold features a dragon flying across the sky. And this is really interesting because some people argue the dragon represented some symbolic, mysterious and mystical event. However, some contemporaries agree that this was just a firework that had been set off accidentally while Cardinal Wolsey was delivering his mass to both monarchs. So given the massive effort that it took to bring these 2 kings and their retinues together, as well as the expense that they both incurred, was this event actually historically significant? Well, even though the summit had held great importance and it was the first meeting between Henry and Francis, the political outcomes of the summit were relatively few. And despite promising not to compete directly against each other, it was Henry that had challenged Francis to the wrestling match, and when he had lost, it cast a dour mood over what should have been a jovial event. There are many that would now agree that the summit actually came to nothing. In fact, relations would worsen between the 2 kings only a few months after the summit ended, because Henry allied himself with Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. At the time, the Holy Roman Empire was France's biggest rival, and the 2 nations would go to war over control of Italy the following year. With the Holy Roman Empire and France at war, Henry had to make a decision about who he would join. Unfortunately for France, Henry sided with his ally and went to war against Francis only the next year. Today, the site of the Grand Field of the Cloth of Gold is now commemorated with a plaque. It is a lovely way to remember a splendid, albeit short-lived, friendship.
If you've enjoyed this video and would like to find out more about history, then feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel or perhaps follow us on Twitter and Facebook.